Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Ford, Executive Director and founder of RHCR Theatre. I would like to welcome all of you to our very first virtual production, Iowa Stories, The Vietnam Experience, written and compiled by Marilyn Shaw. This show is kind of a personal show to me. This will mark the fourth time that I've had involvement in either being in or directing this show. A little background about this show. This show was written in the late 80s, early 90s by Marilyn Shaw, a communication professor at the University of Northern Iowa. She interviewed 27 men and women Iowa Vietnam veterans and compiled their stories into a play featuring 9 characters, 6 men and 3 women. That first production opened on February 22nd, 1990 on the UNI campus. And what was supposed to be just a couple nights actually ended up turning into a production that ran all the way from February until November, where they had a closing performance. Most notably, they were hosted at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial on July 3rd in Washington, D.C., and the cast was hosted by Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley, and they performed actually at the Wall. This story is unique in that it is almost all monologue driven. So what you're about to see is not necessarily something you've seen before. The characters interact in that they tell stories that relate to each other, but they don't interact back and forth as in a regular conversation that we usually see play out on stage. I was first involved in 1994 when Professor Shaw was asked to restage the production 4 years after her original show for a traveling wall memorial. In 2008, I brought this show to Theater Cedar Rapids. At the time, Executive Director Richard Barker allowed volunteers to do things on the main stage when the main stage was dark. So they allowed me to do this show for 2 days there, and we actually ran for a few months. We traveled to Iowa City, traveled back to Cedar Rapids to Kennedy High School, and we actually finally performed again up at UNI at the Gallagher Blue Dorn. Then in 2015, for the anniversary of the Vietnam War, the Veterans Memorial Commission here in Cedar Rapids asked me to bring this play back, and we performed at Veterans Memorial Coliseum on Veterans Day in 2015. With the current state of the world and the current state of theater, we here at RHCR are trying to figure out what do we do next. And immediately this show jumped to my mind because I think it lends itself well to a virtual format. What you're about to see is a staging of this show as if these 9 men and women Vietnam veterans are in a virtual support group, sharing their stories, supporting each other, and just basically relating their experiences to the war. And really, as much as they all are different people, a lot of their experiences were the same. I thank you so much to now retired Professor Marilyn Shaw for allowing us to put on this show, as she's always graciously allowed me to put on the show. And I hope that all of you enjoy RHCR's 30th anniversary staged reading production of Iowa Stories, The Vietnam Experience.
Walk with me, my son, to hear my stories of lost battles, of a war that could not be won.
I'll talk to you of men who left their homes, pride in their hearts, muscles of stone.
Proud warriors of our country, ready and trained to fight, soldiers that now cry of nightmares night by night.
Listen to my words of damaged and body-scarred men, crippled minds that cannot mend.
No marching bands or heroes' welcome came to be. We're forgotten soldiers, remembered only by me.
For we are not those glorious warriors that you read of, my son, only forgotten soldiers of war that cannot be won.
I volunteered for the service when I was 2 months after I turned 17. And then I went through my basic training and my AIT training and went to Germany. Just after my 18th birthday, I went to Vietnam.
I got out of high school and I had a chance to go to college on a music scholarship. I didn't really want to go. I didn't really want to do anything. I was glad to be out of school. I don't know. Back then the draft was real heavy, and I was drafted in '65, and that's when they built up, and you really couldn't, unless you really had your goals set to go to college and accomplish something or whatever, you didn't have any other choice. You either had to have your whole life planned out or you were draft bait, and that was it, unless you had an exemption of some sort.
Well, my father sort of raised me on wartime stories from World War II, and it was very clear to me that the best part of his life was in the Army. He loved it, and I couldn't afford college. I wanted to get a bachelor's degree in nursing. I've been working as a nurse's aide since I was 16, and I always wanted to be a nurse. It was very congruent to my family's value system that you make a contribution to society. So my family was very supportive of my being a nurse, but we couldn't afford anything. And I was reading literature, and it was clear to the counselor, even then, that I needed a bachelor's degree and I couldn't afford that. I had researched, and I knew the Army would pay my way. So I got into the Army as soon as I could, so I could go to college.
My country afforded me the opportunity to get an education. I had no doubt about the sincerity of the people that I came in contact with, my elders and the people at college who assisted me to go through school. When it came time, when I wanted to go to graduate school, I was not accepted because my draft board changed my classification to 1A. So I enlisted, just beating the induction papers. It really wasn't a choice. I was knowing that I had to fulfill the obligation when Uncle Sam called. It is so amazing. The same day I shipped away on my regular enlistment, my induction papers were in the mailroom that very same morning.
After I registered for the draft, they sent me my induction notice. Just for giggles, I went down and took my induction physical, and I flunked it because I had a history of knee trouble. So I forget what my rating was, something like a 4. Whatever the rating is they give you for available for recall at a later date. Well, I wasn't a good student. I wanted to party. Yeah, I certainly was not a good student. I flunked out of Wartburg and then enrolled in Marshalltown Community College on probation. That was in the fall of '65. Then I got my grades up that first semester, so I stayed. No, I wasn't on probation the second semester, so I goofed off again. I had to hurry up and get myself back into summer school before I get drafted that summer. That was '66. Well, I finished Marshalltown the 1st of February, 1967. I wasn't going to enroll because I knew I wasn't paying attention in college. I mean, I was just wasting my money. There's no sense in me even staying. So I just, I knew I was going to get drafted, but I kept putting it off and putting it off. And I was anticipating when I was going to get my draft notice, and it didn't come, and it didn't come. So rather than go through the anxiety, in March, I just went down and volunteered for it. 13 days later, they sent me my induction papers. I just went in and volunteered. I said, just draft me. You might as well take me as soon as some poor other sucker. Just take me a week earlier.
I was planning to teach school, all right? I had a teaching degree, and I was looking through National Education Teaching Journal, and there was an ad in there for special services. And it had a picture of this woman in a total blue uniform standing in front of the Eiffel Tower under the caption, "You'll never be the same." And I thought, going to Europe sounds like a lot more fun than teaching in Iowa. So I applied and I went through the interview process. And the CIA and the FBI and everything else was checking up on me. And I was supposed to go to Germany. I was scheduled to go to Germany, and about a month before I left, I got this phone call from Washington, and they said, well, we're overstaffed in Germany right now, but we have some openings in other parts of the world. How about if we send you to Vietnam instead? At which point I went into hysterics. Well, that didn't sound like such a good idea to me, but I thought, let's see, does this mean that I won't get to go anywhere? So I didn't bother to ask. And that was where I got sent. And I never regretted it. You know, if I had the choice now, that's where I would choose. But at the time, my brother was in the Navy already, and my parents were petrified that he was going to have to go to Vietnam. And he ended up in dry dock in San Francisco. And I had to tell them that their daughter was going. That wasn't a very popular evening.
I really didn't know what Vietnam was. I just knew I wanted to get into the Air Force. I wanted to go into the service, and I didn't have any long-range goals, so to say. I just wanted to get away, go to the service, get that out of the way, and then get back to school.
I was in college, in junior college. I wanted to stay out and work for a while, but I knew they'd draft me, so I just walked into the draft one day. First, I went to take a physical, see if I could pass. I passed it. I walked in and said, I'm here to volunteer. They said, as soon as you sign this paper, you're gone. And I said, that's okay. I wanted my name moved to the top of the list, but I didn't anticipate ending up in the infantry because I had 2 years of college. I thought I'd get a desk job or something. But then, February of 1967, things were just starting to heat up then. I went into the Army in January and ended up in Vietnam in July.
I felt that it was my duty to go. So I did. I volunteered to go. I was career by that point in time, and I just felt it was my job to go. It was no more right for me to go than a man to go. I was in the Army.
I went a semester to school and started second semester. My draft number was 110 and they were at 108. So 5 of us decided. I was only taking 13 hours. And to stay in school or to get back next semester, you had to take 15 hours and go to summer school. Well, I didn't decide to go to summer school. And there were 5 of us. We got together and decided to all go in at the same time. So after a week, we quit Ellsworth and we got together and went in together.
I went into the Air Force because my father was in the Air Force. By joining the Air Force, I advanced to specialty areas, well, commandos. I went to Vietnam as an air sea rescue.
I graduated in the spring, but I went back to participate in some theater while I was waiting to go over there. Now, most of my friends thought I was going to Germany. It was strange. I'd been in a peace march, but it wasn't a peace march. It was a protest on campus for I don't even know what. And I knew I was going to Vietnam, and I was thinking, you're marching in this thing, and you don't even know what it's about? And so maybe the peace marches were starting and everything, and I thought, maybe I ought to find out what it's all about. I thought it might be a good idea.
65. I had 2 friends that graduated from ahead of me. They both were in the Marines, and they both had been discharged from the Marine Corps, and both of them had been in Vietnam. I had asked them where they'd been at in there. I was interested in the Marine Corps, you know. I was just curious. I asked them if they had to go to Vietnam, and they both said yes, and that's all they'd said. They just looked at me and said, you don't want to go there. It's just a place you don't want to go. Stay in college. I didn't listen very well.
I was very young when World War II was on, but I just happened to see a copy of Life magazine, and on the cover was a woman who at that time was flying aircraft from factory to factory and flying missions, dragging these balloons that the other planes took target practice on, things like that. And I said at that time, when I grow up, that's what I'm going to do. I guess I never forgot about that.
You know, just being an American, just a sense of patriotic duty.
I didn't really mind basic training. There were guys that, I mean, they hated every second of it. It was preparatory. It taught you the military code of justice. It taught you what you can do and can't do. It got you physical. It showed you your best ability that you could do it. It did have its points. I mean, you got yelled at, but that's just part of it. To see what you could do, what they could get you to do.
I'm cynical. You know, I expected to go into basic training to be in preparation. But one of the problems with the trainers was theirs was a personal experience that they'd experienced. And they in no way can prepare all the basic trainees coming through a basic training program to be prepared for every contingency, from the branch of artillery to the grunt to the chopper pilot. The training basically gets you to shape up physically and act when you're given an order by someone in command. When there is no longer someone in command, and you're faced with responsibilities for somebody else, you're not prepared.
It was basically a lot of routine stuff, how to wear uniform, a little bit of marching stuff, the paperwork. Because the paperwork in the Army was a little, Army hospital was a little different. It was like going to a different hospital, sort of an orientation period. And we also learned how to do tracheotomies and debridements and sutures.
I've always been a questioning person, and I ran into a lot of problems because, I mean, some of the things you were told to do, they just didn't make sense to me. And I wanted to know why. You know, explain this. That's not the way it is. I mean, they're looking for a reaction. You do what we say and without questioning. And I built sidewalks because I asked, why? I had to paint buildings. I had to wash insides of buildings because I asked, why? One time, I caught a girl who fainted in formation, and that's when I ended up cleaning the barracks. Empty barracks. We ended up cleaning the barracks. The girl who fainted, and me.
The whole idea of basic training, or any training that you took, was to survive, you know? They weren't interested in your personal opinion or your physical ability or anything. If you could do what they told you to do, then you qualified. Their idea was to tear you down and then mold you into any way that they want you to be. And they did a good job of that.
We'd get up about 6 o'clock in the morning, go eat breakfast, train for a little bit, run out to the ranges. Everything was geared to shooting. To me, it was. We did a lot of running. We ran 20 miles a day, 10 out, 10 back. We had diseases going around all the time. Our soldiers were dying. We had a couple of guys in our company die because they would run and just get exhausted. Spinal meningitis. We had 2 guys die of that. Well, then they cut back and trucked us everywhere. We had a couple of drill sergeants. Once they got out, they made you get off the truck and run the rest of the way. You know, it was, you'd go until 9, 10 o'clock at night.
Well, you were degraded to such a level that you had very little self-respect, self-esteem for yourself. The military built you, and I would say brainwashed you into a fighting machine that your training was to kill. And that was your mission without thinking.
We were young people. And you take people 21 years down to 18 years, and you take adult human beings the way we were raised to respect. Well, our generation, we were raised to respect our fathers and adult people, you know, in our lives. So you get this adult in your ear every single day, 18 hours a day. We're talking rough days. You got them screaming in your ear to kill or be killed, calling you names like maggot, lowlife, scumbag. Everything they feel can make you feel. I don't care if you're a Rhodes Scholar or Einstein. You're going to react. Human nature is to survive. That's it. Once you do, you become what they want you to be. Either you do or you won't make it.
I didn't think it was that bad, not nearly as bad as I thought it'd be. I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana, and they called it Little Vietnam. We flew right in as a unit. Everything was painted black and yellow stripes, because this was tiger land, and you were becoming tigers. Everywhere we went, we had to growl like a tiger. If you got out of step, you'd have to drop and do 20 and growl like a tiger, or run around the telephone pole 30 or 40 times and growl like a tiger the whole time. And standing in the mess hall, everything was 5 foot apart. We were conditioning ourselves not to group up and bunch up. We'd be in line at parade rest, and the drill sergeant would say, "Give me 5 tigers."
You spend your whole time in wondering why these officers and why these NCOs are so serious all the time. I spent all my time in basic training thinking, someday I'm gonna like this guy. I mean, I'm talking sergeants and my lieutenant. Oh, hated their guts. That's a natural reaction. But I always thought in the back of my head, this is gonna end someday. But then you get to a real war and you realize why they were so serious. They're trying to save your ass.
The nearer I got to going, it really didn't hit me until I knew I was going. And then, of course, you get the jitters. I mean, if you didn't, you wouldn't be human.
It's kind of a bittersweet thought. I guess you do and you don't. You want to experience it and you don't. You can't vision yourself getting hit. Then on the other hand, you don't know what it feels like to be hurt like that. Maybe it doesn't hurt. Well, it's got to. Even in the movies, people scream.
My mother was really upset. She was not happy at all. She couldn't say, "Gee, you can't go." She would never be the one to say, "Oh, this is a dumb thing," or "I don't want you to go." It just wasn't the thing to do. She had a brother that was in the Philippines, during the Second World War, and he ended up in a mental institution for the rest of his life. So that had a real effect on her. And she didn't want me to go, but she had to just grin and bear it.
I understand my family to have been angered. I had to put things on hold. My struggle coming from a kind of lower income family and going through college and wanting to have the opportunity to go on to graduate school being interrupted by the military service, but everything was just, wait a minute, time out. You can't do what you want to do. You're going to do what is asked of you. That's why it's sort of unfair when we look back on the service time.
I was in the Army. I was at Fort Lewis, Washington. Nobody knew that until I came home. I had something like 2 weeks, I think. I just showed up at home one day. My mother was like, "What are you doing home?" "Well, because I got something to tell you." And I told her. And it was bad. She was very upset. My father had no reaction. He was a World War II veteran in the Navy, so he really didn't know what I was up against. Well, I didn't either. I mean, his war experience was going to be totally different than mine was. He didn't relate to the Army.
My mother. Well, this is typical of my mother, though, because she didn't accept my alcoholism. And when I was going to Vietnam, it was more, not that she didn't love me, but it was more like, "Oh, he's going to be all right." I didn't think she wanted to face the reality itself, so it's easier to ignore. Most of my friends wanted to know, why the hell do you want to go over there? Well, that's where it's happening.
There were several kids in my area, Tama, Toledo, the school district, that had been killed. I think it was like 5. So, it hit my mom real hard. It was my turn to go, just she didn't understand why. She didn't balk. "Well, it's your duty. You enlisted. You've been picked. I guess you've got to go." Yet she was real apprehensive. I don't know what I'd do. I don't know how I'd react if one of my kids had to go. I just don't know. They sure better have the POWs back before they do go.
I've got a large family and a lot of friends. When I went out to the airport, my whole family stood in line and several friends of mine, and it was, I went right down the line and gave them all kisses and everything, and each one of them was crying for the feeling that they would never see me again, because as I went down the line, I tried not to show tears either. But as soon as I kissed my mom and dad, it hurt. And yet I tried to tell them that I had good luck and everything else. So don't even worry about anything. I'd probably just, be way back, in the back someplace. I tried to say anything. I could not have them worry. But as soon as I turned my back and headed for the airplane, I just, inside, kind of blew up. But I wouldn't dare turn around or nothing. I just had a heavy feeling. Is this the last time I would see them all? And it hurt.
I was the only female on the plane. I had to go to Travis Air Force Base first. I was the only female assigned at the time. I walked through and I looked down to see if my shirt was buttoned because, I had the feeling that something was wrong because all these eyes were following me. It was really unnerving. And on the plane, I was the only woman, and it was a Pan Am flight. Okay, so we flew into Tonsanute, and people were pretty quiet, not a lot of talking, not a lot of visiting. It was a bit tense. Everybody looked a little frightened at that point. A lot of culture shock. I saw a lot of very alien things to me very quickly. I got off the plane. I went into the terminal. I didn't know where to go. I just followed the guys. I just followed the crowd. I went into the terminal and I stood in line, and this guy at the desk said, "Oh, women don't have to stand in line. You just come right up here to the front and we'll take care of you right away." And of course, the guys didn't mind a bit, and they weren't in any hurry to get there. So yeah, they took me right up there and through processing, and then they had it checked my papers. It was no big deal. And they had a special services had a Jeep waiting for me to take me down to the office. It was no problem. And then the next days I had to go through, well, it was almost the next week, really, all kinds of processing all over Saigon. I remember at the office, they took me into this little room and they gave me this whole pile of stuff to read, all these brochures and everything, and I thought, well, okay. So I started through them, started reading, and all of a sudden, this little red warning light goes off because the semester before, I had just taken discussion and debate, and I thought, I'm reading American propaganda here. And this is really ridiculous. And so the rest of the time I read it, I was picking out the faulty arguments, and everything. I was feeling very superior because I had that knowledge,
We flew commercial, contracted by the government. I think it was International Airlines. I can't remember anymore. Brightly colored plane, which was, of course, maximum capacity, filled. I was the only female on the flight. We stopped in Hawaii for a short break, and I was met there by a whack from the Pacific. That was a surprise to me. Come out of the plane and she welcomes me. She had another officer with her who had served in Vietnam. And while waiting for the plane to refuel and everything, we went inside and had a cocktail. And then it was time to go. And I got back on the plane. And it was awfully hot. I just really remember that. Even when we were airborne, it was humid, hot, and the air conditioning just was not sufficient. Crowded. I mean, we were packed in there like sardines.
We stopped at, from Oakland, we went to Anchorage, Alaska, and we got off while we were refueling, and it was colder than hell there. we were in our khaki uniforms, short sleeves. From there, we went to Wake Island and Okinawa. Wake Island is just a little dinky island. The aircraft came in and the nose was over the water when we stopped. Then we had to pull us back until we turned around, and when we took off, the wheels touched the water. I didn't know if we'd make it to Vietnam. And then we stopped in Okinawa, and then it was Cam Ranh Bay. The flight took about 17 hours.
Well, I know how cattle feel when they get slaughtered. 3,200 guys on a ship that was made for about 1,600. It was called the USS Gordon. It was a merchant marine, and we were packed in there like sardines. We went through a typhoon off the coast of Formosa. It threw us around like a cork in the sea, and well, everybody got sick, and I was happy. It's funny, I thought. At one time, I drove all the way to Des Moines to join the Navy, and that was my original contact with the military. And they refused me because I'm colorblind. I went home and I got drafted. And I went on this ship, and I thought, after about 6 days of being seasick, I thought, boy, this could have been my career. I was so glad when we got there. It was mixed emotions. We landed, and on the shore, we could see artillery fire, and we could see gunships along the way, and all these noises and explosions. And I was thinking, well, you had such mixed feelings. It was like, if I go on land, there's a chance that I could be killed. If I stay on this ship, then I'm going to be seasick. There's not much to choose from. There really isn't.
Everyone was quiet. Everyone was dead serious. I think we were all just really meditating on what to prepare for, and very little communication. Everybody was very, very quiet, and nobody seemed very friendly. I mean, we would ask somebody for a cigarette light, but with that serious venture, I think we were just preparing for it. Not to become tied, not bond between each other.
The beginning of an end, sadness in leaving, apprehension, loneliness. If only in a word, goodbye, could one see the return of a loved one or a friend.
We left from Travis Air Force Base too, and we went through Alaska. And the main thing I remember about the trip was when we got off the plane in Alaska for a break, we were in the lounge just talking, trying to get to know each other. Nobody knew one another. And we were just chattering away, and some civilians at a table behind us started making some extremely rude remarks, which they would never dream of making to total strangers under different circumstances. But because for some reason, since we were in uniform and on our way to Vietnam, we were fair game. And I experienced that several times during that time period. They seemed to think that it was okay to make extremely rude remarks to people in uniform that they'd never seen before in their entire life. A lot of anger was taken out about the political issues against the military personnel. It was very clear to me that we were fair game and that it was okay. If you chose to put on the uniform, you had to expect that people were going to react in public. I mean, it was basically antisocial behavior that society was condoning.
You had no idea, no concept. There's no way to tell anybody what war is all about. I mean, it's ridiculous. I sit here every week, at least once every week, and I hear comments such as, well, Vietnam, those things happen. Everybody's got to do their duty. And these comments are always from people who were never involved in it.
Adaptability, so very important in this existence.
My first impression was it was about 1,000 years behind time because the people never had soap. They just, they wore the same clothes all the time. Like the little kids, they would wear a little shirt, but they never wore anything below the belt. And then the older people, they'd wear the same clothes maybe about like 6 months, 6 or 8 months, the same set of clothes all the time. And their houses would be wide open. You could go in there and they'd be asleep, like sleeping outside. When I got there, it was real hot.
It's nothing you imagined like it would be.
It's almost surrealistic. It's almost like you're in a time warp, you know? You can't believe this happening human beings to somebody that you know. And then the taste and oh God, the smell.
Smelled like I was in a garbage dump. That was my first impression of it. To me, it's strange. And then our country, not our country, our convoy, our escort got sniped on the way to the replacement center. So right away,
Yeah, the first thing you look for is the bunkers. Because they tell you, at no certain time, they can drop mortars or rockets any time of the day. So you prepare for it and try to find, you're always trying to find an exit or the nearest bunker, the first place to dive for.
It's a gorgeous country. If Holiday Inn and Ramada Inn could ever sign a deal with those people, they'd have it made because it's the most beautiful piece of land I have ever been on. The mountains and everything, it's gorgeous, just gorgeous. That back there is my most vivid memory, and I can still see it today. And then you start looking down and you see the slime and the death and all that.
Of course, the minute you walked off the plane, you wanted a gun. They took us right through the middle of the afternoon. I never will forget. Right through the middle of Pleiku. There were people everywhere. We had no guns or anything. Then we went to a base camp. Divisional base was a big place. I don't know how many soldiers. Man, they're the support for everything. Never will forget. Got just to the edge and we had to dismount because everything was mud. The trucks couldn't move in it. The road ended at the end of the village.
I remember the heat, and just the first week, it was just mainly getting oriented and finding out what my duties were going to be and responsibilities and meeting, of course, the new people. It went by very rapidly, that first week did.
I was so scared. And it's the fear of the unknown. You didn't know what to expect. It wasn't anything like I expected it to be because I was in the mountains. What we saw on TV was all down south in the jungles and swamps.
It felt like it was 120 degrees. And it would be that hot and raining. It didn't matter you didn't wear your rain gear, because as soon as you were in the sunlight, you'd just sweat.
the humidity was real bad. You talk to somebody who was in the jungle all the time and ask them, and that's what they'll tell you. It was real bad because that's where you had to watch the jungle itself along with the war. And it always rained on you. I remember going through the swamp place and it rained leeches. I made it through the swamp place and it rained leeches. It made you become an animal. At night, we made a hooch and we took 3 ponchos and made a little lean-to. And there were some cold nights because we were in the mountains. I remember one night there was a mountain and just tore everything down in sight. Those monsoons, they'd rain all night and all day, just like you had a bucket of water dumped on you. And then the sun would come out and those jungle fatigues would dry right now. And then you'd wait 20 minutes and it'd rain again.
We arrived early in the morning. And of course, the minute you walk out the door, it hits you and you feel like you're drenched immediately. And they were hustling everybody around. And we had to run from the plane into the reception area because they were still, well, this was still during the tent of 68. And so it was just hurry up. And really, I think for everybody, nobody really knew what was going on. I mean, it was just, you do this and you do that.
It was like this humongous germ hanging over your head, waiting to get you. I mean, it was hot and humid and dirty.
We really felt out of place. We were called newbies, and the term fit.
We landed in Benoit, which was 10 miles from Long Binh. where the 90th replacement people, where everyone in process was. And I remember we got herded onto these big buses, and they were firebombing buses at the time, and I knew that. And they herded us onto these big buses, and the MPs lined up in front of the buses and behind the buses and next to the buses, and with their machine guns mounted on the jeeps. You know, one guy driving the jeep and one guy standing by the machine gun, and I knew we were in trouble.
When we came into Cameron, I think we were processed in like 2 days. We went from Cameron Bay to Da Nang to Quang Tri, where we trucked up to Dong Ha. And that was like the 3rd day I was in country. 3rd day, maybe 4th day at the most. The first night at Dong Ha, we took incoming rocket. I thought, dear Lord. So I was already wondering what I had gotten myself into.
We got there around 11:15, and it was good and hot. They were trying to get us off the plane before the rockets blew us up. Noticed a line of body bags lying there. It got tough really quick once you were there. A lot of people didn't even look. They just kept on going. You'd be passing. As you're going off, troops would be going home. And the look on their faces was like, you just didn't know what you were getting into. Some of these guys just had a dead stare. They were out of it. They were going home. A lot of the guys going home be throwing comments to the rear. They'd be calling you fucking new guys and stuff like that, Welcome to Vietnam. Glad I am leaving. It was a real strange thing when you got there. All the guys going home and you'd be coming in. You'd look at them and they'd just shake their heads. You kind of thought, what is going on? What am I getting into?
Well, the rookie element is still there. It never stops. If you become comfortable with the idea of knowing that you're in a hostile environment, I don't think I had. But I didn't live with that fear that I initially had when I was first in country. I became more relaxed about that. You just didn't think about it as much. I mean, you had too many other things to think about. Boy, I hated the night. I hated the night with a passion. I longed for the daylight every day I was there.
What is it good for? Nothing. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing.
The first day we got there, we were hit by rockets. The very first day. But after that first blast of rocket attacks, it was kind of quiet. Well, actually, it's kind of quiet up until the Tet of 68, the Tet Offensive. Then things started getting lively around there. We had close to 2,000 Vietnamese try to storm the Air Force base overnight. Me and 2 other guys got stuck in a bunker for over 12 hours. And Rusty, that's a story. He got hit in the chest, and I was holding a sucking chest wound in the guy for 12 hours. And he died with me and the other guys in the bunker. He just passed away eventually. But we were holding off the Vietnamese. The VC attacked us. The Army and Air Force base, they couldn't get to us because we were the most extended bunker in the base. They had overrun our bunker 3 times. And they had to drop ammunition to us twice. I've always thought that if we could have gotten him out of there sooner, he'd be alive today. But we were trapped. They couldn't get to us. It was a situation like you're out there, man, 150, like 200 yards outside the base perimeter. They're around us. They're trying to get into this bunker. They're dropping bombs. They're killing everybody around. They're trying to come in, and we're trying to keep them out. There's not much you can do, I mean, bullets are flying. There's gun smoke everywhere. And gooks are trying to come in through the door and through the window. And it's so damn hot. Rusty, he stayed alive as long as he could. We didn't have any plasma. I was going direct. My commander kind of chewed me out for that. But he said, you did what you had to do, and damn it, you did what you were trained. You know, there were guys in the same bunker that had the same blood type, but I had a tube, and I was going direct. I was pumping direct, even from my own arm. I was keeping blood in him, you know, but it got to the point where he was just so weak. Rusty was conscious for about 12 of those hours. He knew what was going on, and I knew what was going on. I told him, I can't do anything, man. All I can do is keep you from bleeding to death. He told me, says, I know, but you got to get out of here, man. You got to go back and tell my family what happened. He made me promise. And I did. You know, right there, that was probably the hardest thing I had in the world to do. Was to go see his family and tell him I was there. I was trying to save him, but he died. You know, they forgave me, but it was drilled into our heads. You never leave a man down. You do everything you can, but it was drilled into our heads. You do not leave a comrade behind. I just, for a lot of years after that, I had a real problem with failure. And I think it was because of that.
I don't remember very often being afraid in Vietnam. It was really strange. It's like you live with that every day, so you just sort of accepted it, you know? You didn't really think about it all the time, even when the rockets were coming in. Anyway, if it's got my name on it, it's got my name on it, you know? It was like an old John Wayne movie, like being in the wagon train, just enclosed, secluded. But also it really brought us all together. The camaraderie and the responsibility for each other was incredible. It was like we were cut off from the rest of the world. Just, that was a world of our own.
One time, we were sitting on the outside of the trail, waiting, and I had this thing in my head saying, "This is your last day, man." I just knew it was going to be our last day. So I did everything I could I had my men all in position, exactly like I wanted them, to keep an eye on what we were looking for. We had the traps and everything set up in a special way. I just kept saying, this is it. Somehow they're going to get more than just a couple of guys. They're going to come in and this is going to be it for me. I was very well armed. I had an M16, also had shot, grenades, everything I needed. I had I also had a 38 pistol with me, just laid out, just perfect. And I still didn't feel I had enough. I mean, everything was just set up for, I could take on a whole platoon by myself. That's the way I had everything set up. I tried to tell myself that I'm not going to get killed today. But still, I knew it was my last day. I felt this way for hours. And one of my squad came over and started talking to me. It was a complete whisper. Somehow he got me out of it. He got me to believe that it wasn't going to be my day, that I had made it through hours, and now I just felt that was going to be it.
I had a really good friend from Hawaii that was a squad leader. And we went out on a mission, a search and destroy mission. We were out all day and a lot of people got wounded. I found out one guy got killed. And that was the guy that I had bunked with back in Hawaii. We were in the same room and we were only there maybe a couple weeks. And that was really sad because we were just like brothers. I was just sure that he was going to make it. And I thought he was a better leader than me. But out of the whole outfit, there was only one guy killed, and that was him. And it kind of shocked me because that was my best friend in the whole outfit. And that happened right away, and I was really sad. Well, I couldn't talk about it to anybody. A lot of people were talking about it. I really remember that better than anything. I think that was the hardest part of Vietnam. That people you knew, you might know them, then maybe 5 minutes later, they might be dead. You know, they were quite young.
In my off hours, I was just so exhausted. All I wanted to do was sleep, if possible. In the nighttime, I found that extremely difficult because we were so close to the perimeter that you'd hear everything from the machines going off, the machine guns going off. You'd hear the flares popping at night. And of course, that makes you wonder, is Charlie coming in? And all the guys awake out there in the bunker line? So to me, sleeping was difficult.
We had a tunnel compound nearby. We could hear them digging at night. And then, in fact, we put up radar to see if anything was moving, if any movement above ground, but we never did detect much. They generally moved early in the evening before it got dark, but it was kind of a mystery. A lot of it. Like they'd have oxen and ox carts going down the road and everything, or bicycles. Well, it would just give you an indication that there was going to be more to come at the dead of the night.
Along the Cambodia-Vietnam border, they had, for lack of a better term, these cadre would have powwows. You know, they'd get together and a commander from this unit would come and a commander from that unit, and they'd coordinate their military strategy. Who's doing what? Who's where? So when the commanders got together, we tried to sort out the intelligence to find out where they met, or if one was going to be in the village. In order to do this, we had a series of spies, generally young girls, ages 13 to 16 somewhere, who'd get into these villages by, you know, there's a relative there, or there's blood connection somehow, cousin, uncle, aunt, grandfather, someone. Her sister had married a guy from that tribe. I mean, they got there. They were already in place by the time I got there. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but the story in a nutshell, that's how we did it. We'd go in, we'd set up a perimeter around the village and wait until our chance to nab them. And then we'd grab them, interrogate them, and then kill them. They also had a perimeter set up too, and you'd have to work your way through them to get in. So there was a lot of silent killing. Grab them by the throat like so, and cut their head off. That's how it worked. Spooky. It scares me to know I got to do that. The Nards did most of it, but when you had to, you did it. You did it. It needed to be done. It was going to help us win the war. It took me a while to talk myself into doing it. But like they say, once you get that first taste of blood, It's a fix, and it's real hard to come to terms with it. It wasn't then.
At first, I was fascinated riding in the helicopters, looking out into the jungle. That is until the first time we were fired upon. I guess it had escaped me why this is dangerous. Down below us is the enemy. But I mean, puffs of black smoke hit, and I still didn't realize. I mean, the machine gunner was sitting behind me and tapped me on the head and said, "That's Charlie." At that time, the helicopter just peeled over and he started taking these evasive moves. If I hadn't been strapped in, I would have gone right out the door. I remember that so well. And I remember from that time on, I wasn't so free to hang out the side of the helicopter as I once had been.
I worked in an orphanage. I would go out to an orphanage and to a leper colony. Really got to know people that way. This leprosy was not the contagious type. These people, they had some of the biggest pigs you have ever seen in your life. They had huge, huge pigs. Now, they just loved it when we came out because we carried rice and mash. Well, the nuns ran it, and the one nun who ran it kept telling me she was VC. IVC, I not Vietnam, IVC. She left North Vietnam because of her religion, so she decided to be a nun in a leper colony. She was just always joking. She was a neat lady.
I remember driving to a med cap one time. Our preventative medicine officer was a pediatrician, and so he organized the nurses on their days off to go to the orphanages and to give medical help to the orphans. But anyway, I remember this one time. We left for an orphanage right ahead of a firefight one day. We could hear them coming when we left. We were in an off-limits area too because we went to places where the kids were. We got through it okay. I don't really know how we pulled that one off. We just did it and took off. Evidently, we were just small time and they weren't after us. We got down to the area where the orphanage was and it was okay. And we went home by a different route.
It was Christmas Eve, and the Thais had invited me over to their camp for a party that night, okay? So it's Christmas Eve, and I'm going over to that party with a bunch of Buddhists. And I was feeling kind of depressed. Oh, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing or anything. They took me in a Jeep across camp, and it was a beautiful night. It was this big moon, and we were going across camp, and I looked up the hill, and here were these snowmen up here. And I thought, no, I'm seeing things, you know? And so I said, wait, stop the Jeep. Drive up there. And I just couldn't believe this. And it turned out some guys had taken sandbags and painted them white and set up this whole snowman family up there. You know, little hats and everything on them, clothing and stuff. You know, it was military stuff, but I just couldn't believe it. That was wonderful. I'll never forget that image of looking up there and seeing those snowmen on that top of that hill. It was so incongruous. It wasn't anything I expected to see, and it changed my whole mood from that moment, you know? I found depression to just be totally relieved. I know it sounds like a silly thing, but most things that affect you, shoot, they were very simple.
Christmas of '67. We were close to Cambodia. We were about 3 miles away. The Vietnamese had carried some 105 artillery up this nearby mountain, piece by piece. And they were shelling our fire base with it, and it took 2 days to get permission to knock it out. It took about 10 minutes to knock it out and silence it. And I know what happened. It was during a Christmas truce, and it had to have gone all the way back to Westmoreland for sure. Maybe they went farther than that to get the okay to, okay, knock that gun out.
Will we all want to get up and leave when it's over? Or will we sit back and wait for the second showing to start before we realize it's the same poor performance as the first? The players become weary, but the audience brings them back with applause and cheers. Little do they know that the majority of the act was ad lib, and the royalties were not paid. The actors like puppets, cannot reason, and they're unable to move without the control of the master puppeteer.
It was exciting. Never a dull moment. Being rocketed almost every night. For a while, well, for starters, it was every night, several times a night. But after a while, like everything else you said, oh, here it comes again. The Mama-sans went home early. That must mean the base is going to get rocketed. That was a good sign. The Vietnamese disappeared. We knew something was up.
We got hit pretty hard. We had quite an artillery barrage, and it lasted about 3 days. That's probably the most memorable moment, other than I brought a guy home from Cambodia, a dead man. He was coming home, and I brought him home. At the time, I thought I was responsible for his death, since it was one of those times I froze in the machine gun, and I thought they needed the machine gun real bad. And I didn't fire it for, I bet 30 seconds. It's just that I froze. I finally came to my senses, and he was already dead. It's just, I always wondered whether or not it was my fault. We were quite deep. Well, not deep. We were 20 miles into Cambodia, and they wanted to leave him there, and I said no. It was going to take us 3 days to get back to Vietnam to get him out. So I knew I was going to have to carry him. They left me alone, me and 2 other Montagnard fellows. And they helped out a bit. They carried, but by the time I got into Vietnam, he was in pretty bad shape. He was falling apart. But his body came home, I always thank myself for doing that. At least his mother got to have him again. But it was a bad deal.
We could never depend on anything. More people were out in the field, more units. They would stay out for longer periods of time. Sometimes the service club would be absolutely empty. There would be just nobody there. We would close it down and just wander around and talk to the guys who were around. Our programming, we just forgot that. I'd just pull out something whenever somebody was there. The way the troops reacted was different too. They changed. They'd come back into the club, and they'd always tell us what was going on, out in the field and what happened and stuff. After Tet, they got quiet. They weren't as exuberant. They'd just stand around in the rain, and we'd walk by, and they'd just stare. I don't know. They all looked shell-shocked. It was a very different mood.
From daylight to long after dark was nothing but work. I never worked less than 14 to 16 hours a day, and that was every day of the week. It was tiring. It was physically draining, emotionally draining. I was in country 10 days exactly when we were first rocketed, so that was always a constant threat. You never knew when they were going to come in, so you always had that fear in the back of your mind. I recall the absolute terror that I experienced when we were rocketed for that first time. It took me a good 30 minutes to calm down after it was all over with. I was shaking so badly, it just scared me that badly. I think that really hit me. That really brought it all home,
We took resupply within a 6-day period. So we carried rations for feeding ourselves. Everything was on our back. Our helmets were on our back. We operated sweeping through areas, and when we needed to have a supply bird, we'd sweep through areas to clear a place to put down our resupplies and bring in the mail. It was about a 21-day run. Then we would go for refitting and to get our hair cut spit and polish and refurbish losses we had suffered in equipment, radios. And some days it would be one day in and right back out to other area.
Well, I carried 8 canteens and was always out of water. We got resupplied every 3 days, 9 meals. They'd send us water from the rear, and they'd send it in 105 artillery round shells filled with water. Take them by chopper and drop them out to us. We got a change of clothes once a month, whether we needed it or not. We got a sack of pants, a sack of shirts, sacks of socks. We didn't wear any underwear. And we just go grab one. And if it didn't fit you, just switch with your buddy. But it just didn't matter, because 10 minutes later, you were filthy again. You'd become such an animal. You'd sit down in the mud and go take a break.
We had one site I really didn't like to go to at all. It was on top of a mountain. We called it the Hill 78 or something like that. We had a radio relay up there, and the only way in and out was by helicopter. The VC, they owned the bottom of the mountain, but we owned the top of the hill. I always had a fear of having to spend the night up there, and I never wanted that to happen. I had a deep fear of that. We had to, but they did have protection, of course, a company of infantry up there that patrolled, and of course it was well fortified, but just the idea they could creep up the mountain at night and attack. I was always happy once I lifted off from there and returned, looking out for me, I guess.
I was majoring in speech and theater, okay, with an English minor. I went over thinking I was going to be directing plays and entertainment, you know? When I got sent to Phuc Vinh, which was just a brigade, a field camp, TEP broke out. So there was no way I could even think of directing a play. I mean, to cast a play and then have your cast go out in the field and not come back again. You never knew from day to day. You could never depend on anything.
The first 6 months I was over there, and it was hit and miss, hit and miss. We really wanted to find them. They played a game with us. From the Tet Offensive on, they came out of the trees in uniform and regiments, and it was more like it should be. We didn't have any problem tackling them, just as long as we could find them.
They operated in groups, these little groups of 3 men here and 3 men there and 3 men here, and then they'd have a rendezvous point. So they'd rendezvous and hit us and then split into those little groups again. Well, you could look forever for 3 men and never find them. They harassed us, but I guess that is what jungle warfare is. We didn't have any problem killing them, just finding them. For a long time, as I marched through that jungle, I thought, why aren't we ever seeing any other Americans? Or why did we not find out where they'd been or what they'd seen? The news said we had 900,000 guys there. That's a lot of people. But if you think about it, it takes 9 men in the rear to support 1 guy in the field. So we really only had about 100,000. The rest were just back in the rear.
Well, I was feeling better as I went on. At first, I was kind of down because I knew there was a long way to go, and I knew a lot of people were getting killed. And you always figured it was just a number of days before it was your turn. And I mean, we had quite a turnover, a percentage of people getting wounded or killed, and death was coming pretty often and pretty fast every day. You always had to think about the enemy 24 hours a day. And I think what happened to a lot of young soldiers, they never realized that at first. When they first landed, they just knew that death was close, and they were careless a little bit. When you got close to the end of your tour, you took more care of yourself because you were thinking, if I make it a few days more, I'm going to get home. And that's what everybody did. And everybody was just miserable and wondering when they would get out of Vietnam because it was a bad experience.
Unweariness to a person, I think, keeps him on edge. I mean, because you never knew You never knew. Following your, well, even though you'd been in country, I mean, there's always that element of not knowing, and you never knew where they were going to hit or what was going to happen. That never left you. At least it never left me.
When I first got over there, I'd say about the third or fourth week I was there, we went out to the bunker line one night to check to make sure they had enough water and stuff like that. Heard one of the bunkers say that one of the guys went back to the John and didn't come back yet. They said he'd been gone 15 minutes. Well, that was long, but we didn't quite think about it right off the bat. So we went on cruising down the line and called back, and he had been gone 25 minutes. We decided that maybe we should go back. And the outhouse sat back on the other side of the road. We stopped and started to walk up to it, and we heard a thump. We thought that was kind of strange, but we didn't think of it. We were getting hit with mortar. One of us threw the door open, and the kid had an M79 and pulled the trigger. Off the trigger was a Dear John letter. That was real tragic. My first experience with death. Suicide to me is awful hard. I don't know why. To me, it is a waste. Why would a woman write a guy that went to the service, over to Vietnam, a Dear John letter? That was hard to understand. I suppose over the year I've seen about 20 go like that. There was just an awful lot of it.
We got mail almost every chance, every night just before sunset. I would make sure my squad was always perfectly shaped and everything. And then I would get back and take off everything except for, my clothes. Sit down in the bush, start thinking. I try to write a letter to my wife. We were engaged then, so I try to write a little bit. I'd lie quite a bit. I tell her that we were way in the background. We hadn't seen anything.
I didn't want to write home and tell my mom, well, I killed 3 gooks today. Wasn't too bad. What else you gonna tell them? What did you do? Oh, I went down to the club and got drunk. Making a party all the time? I didn't want to tell them. So I started making up stuff.
It's just, hi, Mom, I love you. Never told her that before. I'm counting the days. I'll be home in March. See you later. I guess it was just kind of casual.
I did discuss it because I was in a combat area and I was married and had kids. and I wanted them to know what was going on. And so I discussed it with them, and it was a big buildup that they knew what was happening, and they would tell you about it.
I'd talk about my dog or about the USO show that I was in town, or I went to Saigon, went out and had a few drinks, and I saw a movie. You didn't want to tell them about, or I went to the zoo, stuff. You didn't want to tell them about going out on missions and that kind of stuff. I'd mention it once in a while. We had a rough mission the other day. I'd leave it there. I didn't really want to get into depth. Didn't really want my mom to know.
Actually, I did pretty much talk with my parents about it because we're a very close family. Like I said, they've always been supportive of everything. Once I was there and there wasn't anything they could do about it, they didn't begrudge me that or anything. They just quite the opposite. And my grandparents were the same way. They wrote constantly. I even got, my grandfather never wrote a letter. He wrote me a letter, I got this letter from them, and they'd seen a television broadcast about some action that was going on around Phnom Penh, and the broadcast apparently made it sound like the whole camp was just wiped out, decimated, and they were just frantic. So when they got my letter and found out that I was alive and everything was okay, they wrote back and told me what had happened. That night it was supposed to have happened, I was at a party at the officers club, okay? So I thought, it's going to be better for me to just let them know where things are. I said, if anything really happens, I'll let you know. So don't listen to news media or whatever. We had so many false reports about things that were happening.
I discussed work as to how many hours we had put in. As to what was going on around us or in the field of battle, I did not. Number one, I felt they didn't care. I mean, that's the opinion the impression that I got, and that's what you kept hearing is that, all the anti-Vietnam sentiment back stateside.
In August of 1968, I didn't receive one piece of mail for the entire month. And I was devastated. Each day, everybody, they hawked the mail. They knew exactly when it was due in, and it was just that important. But I didn't hear from anyone for the entire month. And I think I felt a little sorry for myself. As a matter of fact, they didn't care. Didn't they know what was going on over here? Weren't they concerned? I remember even to this day, because it grew as the days went by with no mail, I was almost embarrassed to go ask the mail clerk, did I have any mail? Because, I'm sorry, ma'am, no mail today, maybe tomorrow. That went on for a month, and I was really down, really down.
There was an old saying that was used very often in Vietnam. The guy that told it to me said, it don't mean nothing, shit happens. A very, very used saying. That's the way you gotta look at it. It don't mean nothing, shit happens. Keep on going. If you let it bother you, it'll waste you. Sooner or later, you make mistakes, and it's best to put it back in your head, put it way back, and get on going. And that's the way a lot of guys got back to the States. You keep pushing it back. You push it back far enough, and pretty soon it comes back out. You got to deal with everything.
I was just thinking, what I had to do if I wanted to live, to come home. Because a year is a long time in this area. And it was very difficult to cope with. And you had all this, you always had to watch yourself. You never knew when they were going to attack or what was going to happen. You were just counting the days when you'd go home. Almost everybody kept a calendar, how many days they had to go, and it worried them constantly. They kept up with it every day.
Well, of course, the shorter you got, the better you felt. It was kind of a boost because, like, the first 6 months, you had so long to go, you figured you were never going to get out of Vietnam. Then when you were getting short, you were feeling better. Your morale picked up.
No, the shorter you get, the more nervous you get because you feel, I've made it this far and nothing happened. Within a month of the time that I was to leave, we were rocketed this one night and it just hit behind my hooch. And an officer that I knew he had only 7 days left in country and was going to meet his wife in Hawaii. And he was killed. And it just, you know how close that was to you again and you escaped it? We couldn't fire back because it came from a friendly village. So we just had to take it. But we couldn't do anything in retaliation.
It was a great feeling knowing that I was going home. They decided that if you had over 10 months in country or been wounded or something, at 10 months and you were out of country, it wouldn't do any good to send you back for about a month. So they would just rotate you back. I was pretty close to 10 months. Kind of worried me, you know, because I felt like one of these times I'm not going to go out and get wounded. You're going to get killed.
I was in a fog by that time. I don't know if it was an alcoholic fog or fever or both, but I was sort of, I don't know. It was like it wasn't quite real. I was moving mechanically, going through the motions. And they finally sent a couple of new girls I was supposed to train and stuff. And during the last month, they had 3 units in there, just moving them in and out. They couldn't decide if they wanted to put anyone there. I don't know. Troop movement was just something else at that time, very unsettled all of a sudden. Where before, you know, I was busy just transferring inventory from one unit to another because we had to get permission for the new units. It was a lot of paperwork, a lot of business, and it was just like it had already ended for me, and I was just going through the motions. Emotionally, it was the same way. You know, I wasn't close to anybody anymore. I was just sort of there on my own, just a hanger-on. And the new girls coming in were very anxious to see me go so they could start their own programs.
Returning home, almost like starting school in the fall to see old friends and family again. Everyone had changed, but in ways I'm not familiar with yet. The joy of a reunion scene so sweet, yet still a half a world to go.
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue. And when the band plays hail to the chief, ooh, they point the cannon at you.
We were about 36,000 feet in the air because everybody was afraid they were going to shoot us down. You take off over the jungle and you aren't free yet. You aren't clear yet. Not until you're out of their space. So I never felt totally safe until we were cruising.
I got home early. I hadn't planned on coming right home. I kind of wanted to be a civilian for a couple of days, but then I decided, well, no, let's just go home. My mother wants to see me. So I just, you know, out of the blue, I got in Cedar Rapids and I called my mother. I said, Mom, you're not going to believe this, but I'm in Cedar Rapids. And these people, this was my first confrontation with society. They wouldn't even rent me a car. You know, I had a lot of money on the counter sitting in front of her, and she wouldn't let me drive a car back to Toledo, Iowa. And I said, well, give me a break. I needed a credit card. Hell, I didn't even know what they were. I need a credit card. I need a letter of reference. I was a GI and they wouldn't rent cars to GIs. I'm going, well, thank you very much. Boy, if I was ever going to hit a broad, that's what I was going to do her right there. But then I thought, wait, no, it's not her. It's not her policy. I'll just shut up and call my mother. You know, that frustrated me just real bad. And by this time, the airport's closing and the janitors are there, and I'm going to have to sit outside in a March storm. I didn't want to call her. I was at my wit's end, man. I just should have taken a cab and gone to a motel.
There was a group of us that were together coming back. We ran into this big executive from Phillips Petroleum, and he wanted to know if we were coming from Vietnam, and a couple of the guys didn't want to say anything. And I said, well, yeah, still in kind of a daze or whatever. He says, can I buy you a drink? And I said, yeah, I could really use one. So I started drinking, and we had like 4 hours till the airplane. So he took us up to the executive suite at the airport and paid for all of the drinks, and we were getting smashed. I was anyway. I was 3 sheets to the wind when I got on the airplane. Well, this one guy sitting across or next to us or whatever, we were having a gay old time, and they were just out of the blue. He said, you guys from Vietnam, just back from Vietnam? I said, yeah. Oh, bunch of baby killers. Of course, I just freaked out. I almost killed the guy. Then the police came in and walked me off to jail. The guy from Phillips Petroleum, he just couldn't believe what had happened. Some of the guys I was flying with knew about Ben. I had tried to adopt him, and he was killed 3 days before I left. And then he told the story, and the petroleum fellow from New York had the company lawyer come out and try to get me out. They treated me decently. It wasn't like I was a criminal or anything. They had heard the things the other guy was telling me that made it happen, and they were understanding. I think they knew I wasn't really like that. Just an instantaneous reaction that I couldn't help.
I remember coming home. My girlfriend and my family met me at Rock Island at the bus depot. I get off the bus and I go up there and say hi to my family, you know. My mom's hugging me and my girlfriend's hugging me and my dad's shaking my hand, and I don't feel anything. You know, I just felt absolutely nothing. No emotion, no anything. Nothing like, hey, I'm home. You know, you see the old movie where the sailor gets off the ship and he hugs his girl, that famous poster where everybody's seen it. Nothing like that.
I was a little frightened. Happy. I was happy to come back. And yet Vietnam had become the known. And I was coming back to a world which was the unknown for me. Also, knowing all the sentiment back stateside, I wondered how I would react to that and what I'd do if someone spit on me, because I know I wouldn't be responsible for my reaction. It didn't happen to me, though. Thank God. Although it did happen to many. Eggs were thrown at them. I came in late at night, and in the wee hours of the morning in San Francisco, I was quick to catch a flight to Seattle. I went from one terminal in San Francisco, the military terminal, to the other one by bus. I had very little contact that way. And I never wore my uniform again, not until I reported into my assignment.
The only welcome I got when I got home, my mother knew I was getting short. The night I came home, I surprised her at the restaurant she was working at. She didn't know I was coming home then. And I walked in on her when she was in the dining room of the restaurant, and we hugged and cried for a little. But that was it. My homecoming was my mother in the restaurant. There was no...
I got hit with some dog shit outside of San Francisco the second time I came back. Baggies with dog crap. I got called a baby killer in Cedar Falls by a very good friend of mine. We're still kind of friends today. They didn't understand what a person was going through over there. They had no concept. If they did, they wouldn't have done that. I was so very young. They didn't understand what a GI was going through. The emotions of being away from home. Probably the first time for a lot of Vietnam guys in a very strange and stressful situation. And then coming back into the world and getting treated like dirt. I just had to realize they didn't know the true story behind it all. And that's why I'm so adamant about education. these people, they never changed. But I expect maybe a little better attitude towards those who went. I just want them to accept the fact that you can hate the war, but don't hate the warrior, because the warrior's only doing just what he was trained to do. The warrior doesn't like the war to begin with. That's why he's a warrior, to stop the war. You can't hate the warrior. There was 150,000 Iowa people that went over and fought in that war, and damn it, they ought to think about that. These guys who were Vietnam vets, they went over to do a job, and they just should get a little respect. They don't need a lot. Just a little respect would go a long ways. Just to glad you're home would go a long ways. You'll see a lot of us vets welcoming each other home.
I resent the fact that the sentiment that existed stateside, that I allowed myself to feel guilty. It was a sense of guilt, like who's right and who's wrong. I tried to forget that I'd been there. I never wore my ribbons when I was at duty. The only time I would put on my ribbons was at a command function. I just didn't want anybody to know. I didn't want to talk about it. I just didn't.
It was kind of a shocking experience. Nobody seemed to care. It was a new world. Nobody seemed to care. Nobody knew you were a Vietnam veteran. Nobody paid any attention to you, except when I got on the plane. I was in uniform, and they made an announcement on the plane that they had a Vietnam veteran on board going to Chicago. And I was on standby, and they found out I was a Vietnam veteran, and they made sure I got home as fast as possible on the plane. This airline company took good care of you, because when I got to San Francisco, I thought I'd have to wait a long time for an airplane. But they said, no, if you run down that ramp, you can get one in 5 minutes. And I was excited.
For me, it was not a problem because I had a friend living in San Francisco who went to college in theater, and he invited me to stay in San Francisco with him for a few days when I got back. So as soon as I landed there, he lived in this residence hotel, and I had a room with a sink and running water. Oh, I thought it was wonderful. He sort of seemed to sense that I needed time, and he said, when you want to do something, let me know, and we'll do it together, or if you want to do it alone, that's fine. So I had for that for about a week, and then I went home. And then when I went home to my family, they had flowers. My dad wrote a poem and everything for me. And it was Christmas time then, and I went out to buy a tree, and this guy wouldn't let me pay for the tree when he found out I was a Vietnam veteran. I had a very different homecoming from what the guys described. So, that was... Then we also at that time had some of the service club personnel, and some of the guys who'd been at Phuc Vin made arrangements that a bunch of us were going to meet in the DC area for New Year's. I went to DC, but I got snowbound at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Missed the whole reunion. When I got to DC, and I loved it. There was no snow, so I moved there. People that I knew were constantly there, in and out, and they always stayed at my apartment and everything. People from Phuc Vin. I still have that contact for quite some time, so I was able to gradually...
I got on out here at the airport. When we landed, there was a guy from Iowan who was in the Marines that came back with me. When we got off the airplane, we were stone-ass drunk. I figured I was going to be an alcoholic the rest of my life because I was drinking pretty heavy. And the stewardess woke us up. We noticed all this foam out there. Well, they had foamed the runways because one of the landing gear didn't come down. I thought, hey, I've been in Vietnam and didn't get a scratch. I landed here and almost died, and I was passed out. Just kind of a rude awakening. Now, we went into the terminal, and he had his Marine uniform on. I had my Army uniform on, and we got spat on by a couple kids. I was kind of furious about it, They spit on my medals. I don't appreciate that at all, and I told him. And the Marine guy, he just kind of held me back, and he says, just ignore them. So we each went on our own way. I was out there for about half an hour. waiting for my wife, so I finally called her. They came out. It must have been about 5 minutes because we only lived just down the road from the airport. We went back to the house for a couple hours, and we had reservations at the Ramada Inn, one of the suites there. About 8 o'clock, we left, got there, and the Shriners were having this big thing there. This guy said, "Hey, you just back from Vietnam?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Hey, we'll pick up the tab for you. You guys eaten yet?" "No." "We'll take you over here to the restaurant." I said, "Well, we'll get something after a bit once we get settled here." He rode the elevator with us, and we went up to the 9th floor, and he walked us to our room and told me to carry the bride across the threshold. I said, "Okay." He said, "Is there anything I can get you?" I said, "No, I can handle it from here. We'll meet you down later for dinner." That was just the opposite. Getting spit on, and these guys were just the opposite, you know? They didn't prod questions or anything. We just talked.
When I left DC, I went to California, Los Angeles, and I was writing then, and I was going to write about Vietnam. And I went to a seminar at UCLA. One of the big publishers from New York was there talking to our class, and the first thing he said was, "If any of you are writing about Vietnam, don't send it to me. We don't want it." So I thought, well, there went that. That sort of ended things for me for quite a few years. Nobody wants to hear about it.
I've talked to so few people about Vietnam because I just don't talk about it easily. I still feel, I spent my year over there, and certainly it took its physical and emotional toll, but I came back all in one piece. I'm whole, at least as far as anybody can tell, but emotionally, it takes a toll. Physically as well. And it bothered me it still bothers me. It still bothers me.
If only they would have known before it all started. Where would they be today if it hadn't started at all? If they wanted it this way, why am I so actively involved? It was a different time, a different people. Look at us today. Where have we been, and how far have we really come? Far enough to say no, or far enough to say yes? The answers are still rising in the smoke and filling the sky with an ugly cloud, and we still look up and cannot read.
I guess I was willing to do it again. I thought this was the biggest bunch of insanity I'd ever seen in my life. Because here we are defending a country against itself because they really didn't want to be defended. The ARVN didn't want to fight. They would much rather have us fight. And the people in the United States didn't want us there, but the government wanted us there. It didn't make any sense at all. Why were we there? What were we doing? I went over there all, I'm going to fight communism and protect us. After I got there a while, I just saw the pure insanity of it. There was Hamburger Hill and Dak To. Now, I wasn't at these places, but I heard what was going on. The 101st Airborne ran up and down this hill 15 times. For what reason? To turn the hill right back over to the enemy as soon as they took it? Because they were airborne? Because they needed to take this hill? They killed how many 1,000 guys? For what? They gave it back to them anyway. It didn't make any sense at all. So after I had been in TAD at 68, I started numbing my mind. I got back and I just wanted to make up for the lost time, the time I lost when I was in the service. So I look around and see all these people I know, and they got nice houses. And I'm not really jealous of them or anything, but I think, hey, if I'd been here, I could have been doing that. I could have been looking forward to that. Yeah, but, anyway, I know for a fact that I've got a world of experience that they will never have in their whole lives. That's what gets me to feel better about it. Knowing the experience I had that 75% of my graduating high school class will never have, just get your pet vet thing. It's kind of nice at first, like everybody says, to get a little respect, but it's too little too late. I mean, I care. I care about the vets in the vets group. Anything I can do to help them, I will help them. Anybody else can just go to hell in a handbasket for all I care.
I've seen the way they've treated guys. Not so much me, but I've seen a lot of guys. Because they are vets, they can't get things together. Because they got problems and depression and stuff, and no one understands or wants to understand. They defended this country, and they're sitting there now. In 59 to 75, they were doing another job, and they can't get another job right now because of Vietnam. If they can't help a serviceman out, if they can't help a vet out and give him a job, then I have no time for them. There have been situations where they could have hired a vet and didn't do it. You take a guy and he's got, he may not have all the technical terms, but by God, he's got military training. He knows how to follow instructions, take control, and do the job, no matter what the job is. That right there, you can go to college for 20 years and never get that kind of training, and I see it every day.
I was wondering who'd be there waiting for me. We had heard some of the stuff that was going on back in the States, how the bigger people were whining about, hell, you guys, die if you want. We were going to stay here. We ain't going. We're not going this year. We heard about that. You baby killers, you'd kill anybody, wouldn't you? So I didn't know what to expect.
My family shared that they felt uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do about it. It's obviously been a long war that people now felt they weren't going to support. They led me to believe that it was something they would just as soon avoid. If they could talk about the weather or plants or crops, if we needed rain, those were the topics, more so than... I hadn't gone on to college. That came up a couple of times. So after 5-6 years, I went back to school.
The GI Bill. Oh, yes, I'm a vet. Give me money. I wasted my education. I have to admit that most of the people I'm around, they accept me for what I am. And since I joined the rap group, my family has been on my life has been on a spiral. Rap group's great. I wouldn't be where I am without it. I went through probably 60 jobs since I've been out of the service. I worked maybe 2-3 weeks, get mad and quit. And I was out of unemployment and out of school and all that. And I just decided it was time to settle my tail down and do something I like to do. So I got into this job, and it's answered every question I've had, everything I want to do for right now, So it's self-fulfilling work. Just getting myself to that point has been the hardest thing to do.
It was hard getting back into the flow of society. What to wear. It had been after 3 years, you don't know. Nothing seemed to fit me anymore. Everything was old, and I always liked to dress well. I was, for lack of a better term, I was an Ivy League type dresser, sharp stuff. I wasn't the blue jean type. I don't know if that's good or bad. I like that good, clean look. So here I am, right away I'm confused. How do I go about this? Usually, the first ones to tell you how to dress were the girls, and then I was still apprehensive about that. That was a hard thing getting back into, talking with girls. Because the only thing I had to talk about was Vietnam. And I was at a loss other than that on the sports page, and that doesn't last long, maybe only 5 or 10 minutes.
Well, I'd do it again, in spite of everything. I mean, if I were called upon to go, I would do it again. It's just the way I feel about it. Even though I know more about Vietnam, having been there, and having been home, I know more about all the politics that went on around here, and all that and everything. But in spite of that, in spite of it all, I'm no better than anybody else, and I love my country, and I'd do it again.
I'm proud of it. If I wasn't married right now, and if I didn't have children, I'd love to go back there and try to get the POWs, because I'm sure we've got them there. I'd like to get about a dozen guys that are just down, just hunters. And this is, well, I'd love to go back because I'd be a sniper. We'd all be. You know, I think there's a way we could get some out. And that's what I'd like to do.
I was a 19-year-old who came back as a 40-year-old. I grew up awful fast. I lost my childhood.
Well, I have some regrets that we were unable to clearly determine the purpose for it, so everybody could listen up and say, hey, we weren't all that wrong. Family structures. There were these people we're talking about. Now, you didn't grow to love them, but you respected their culture. They had family religions. It was passed traditionally down. And when the communists came, the young of that regime wiped it off the face of the earth, destroyed it all. And it's no longer there. So I kind of felt today that I would never want to do anything similar to that again under those circumstances. You know, and I would not let our government commit us to foreign soil without a very clear statement to the purpose or goal. You know, I feel that is where we have really been let down by the politicians.
Well, a French-trained, very highly respected, excellent physician and I were visiting one day, and a psychiatrist was saying, we were talking about the American-Vietnamese relationship, and he asked that when we leave, what will we have left for the people? And he looked me square in the eye, and he said, you have left them nothing. Whew, I had to ask him, please explain that further. Now, this guy was real honest and very, very deeply hurt. And he said, the Americans come, they do things for us and to us, but they don't give us any respect. They don't give us any real control. And so when the Americans are gone, there's nothing there. And I think that is very accurate. We were extremely arrogant with the Vietnamese. We did not respect their race. We did not respect their culture. And we had no idea of the pressure on them.
There's a big glowing difference between the Vietnam War and the rest of the wars this country's been involved in. And that is the education factor. You know, mostly the men and women who served in Vietnam had a high comprehensive level. My biggest problem with Vietnam was I don't feel so much that my effort in the war was useless. It's that I feel like I wasted my time fighting for those who was left over here. You know, okay, I did it. I went over and fought thinking I was protecting people like Abby Hoffman, these privileged groups of people that didn't have to go for either money or for other reasons, you know. You'll hear a lot of these so-called educated people types say, well, I didn't want to die. Just the thought, being able to feel that way, I don't want to go, so I'm not going. To have the ability to do that, it's ridiculous when you stop to think about it, because most of the guys in Vietnam didn't have the opportunity to say, well, I don't want to go.
Nobody, including the President of the United States, has the power or should even consider sending people to die unless it's an extremely just cause. We're talking about we're having a war on. They ruin too many people's lives. They're willing to commit people to dying in the battlefields, but they're not willing to pick up the pieces. Yeah, it's fine, I went. I get 30% disability for post-traumatic stress disorder because I'm a weird dude, all right. I guess I'm different than everybody else who went. But they basically shattered everyone, each one of us, individual lives. And they don't want to account for that.
Years later, I'm shaking now. On the other hand, I'm glad I know I can do it. It's just a hell of an experience. I have no qualms about killing. It's just who I kill, and you're forever relating to someone else. It's part of the war that doesn't go away. You know, everybody's got a temper. Thank you. Mine's under control very well. It always has been. But there's always a time when somebody will say something to you and get, they'll put the edge on you. Everybody gets frustrated. Something stupid, like a clerk in a C-store. They've got to count the change 4 times. And you go, geez, you're the stupidest human being that God let live. You shouldn't be here anymore. And I could just kill you. And bingo. And you think to yourself, whoa, are you still sick? And then I'll calm myself down. I mean, someone will make you mad for some stupid reason, like you'll see some guys get mad at an umpire at a baseball game, and I bet you $1 million the guy's never had an umpire's mask on and been behind the plate. Yet he can stand there and criticize the guy all day. He's, to me, the guy ought to be snuffed. He doesn't deserve to live unless he's done it. That's a hard thing to live with, to keep yourself from thinking those stupid things.
Well, I try to forget about it. I try to never bring it up, actually, but it stays with you. I don't go to the rap sessions. As a matter of fact, I have a strong mind and a will to get ahead. And I don't want to go look back. So I don't let it control me, because to me, Vietnam was a bad experience, very bad. I just want to sort of forget it. And I want to join the people that were there. We don't talk about Vietnam too much, but we talk about helping each other. And I think that's very important.
Life is ludicrous. This existence that we call life here to me is nothing but a joke. That's basically what it is. I look at everyone in the great real world and I laugh in their faces because they're stupid, I'm supposed to go out and function every day. The only difference between me and the rest of the world is my nerves are totally wired. I'm wired, okay? I'm wired 24 hours a day, 52 weeks a year, and I'm supposed to go out and function like everybody else because everybody else says, well, those things happen. That was a war and you've got to go on with your life. But you never do. When you've been in a war, you never go on with your life. It's over.
Well, I think the thing that has been lost in all of the issues around Vietnam is that the GIs were soldiers because that was their job. They were trying to do their very best job they could. They wanted to do the best job, but it was impossible to do that. It wasn't their fault. They did the very best they could under extremely difficult situations. And I think that this nation needs to look at itself and think, why did we put those people in that position?
They really stereotyped the Vietnam veteran. Christians that went into Vietnam that maybe weren't even in conflict. Christians were labeled as baby rapers and murderers and drug addicts and stuff like that. The typical Vietnam veteran is stereotyped, is scorned. They had human waste thrown on them and spit on and stuff like that. Our country should never be divided. We went through the Civil War, and we went through the Vietnam War, looking down on each other for our opinions. But we should never be divided and looking down on each other like that.
It's a black ball. What happens is you get into the 80s, we're into the era of open-mindedness, the 80s, we're moving forward. Yeah, to God knows what. You know, the problem is we're all too old now. We were too young and crazy, and then we were in the middle, and we're getting counseling, and now we're all, well, some of us, I guess, are coming around and getting our lives squared away, but who the hell wants to hire a 42-year-old graduate? When there's 21-year-olds, just line it up. I mean, we're too old now. You see? I know how the system works.
I still have anxiety. It just seems like something, if you're with somebody, it's never quite as bad as when you're by yourself. And having somebody to relate to, if I had had someone in Vietnam, it would have helped a lot. Not having that always felt like an extra deprivation to me, that I didn't have somebody. There's a lot of jealousy that existed if I spent too much time. I mean, if I ate 3 meals a day with the same individual, there were repercussions on that. And so it just made it difficult.
I had to come to terms with it. It was sometime in 1982 that it all started before then, but it came to a head. My wife, there was a rap group set up in Waterloo. I don't know what year. I think it was 1981 or maybe 82. I don't know. It's a Vietnam veteran support group. I remember the first meeting I went to. I found out that my wife had been going to the women's. The wives and girlfriends of Vietnam veterans had a group too at that time. She'd been going to that for maybe a couple of months and was trying to figure out how to get me to go, not to her group, to the men's group. She evidently had seen, she saw me slowly killing myself with booze and neglecting my family. I'd been doing it a long time and I hadn't realized it. I'm getting better at that. Anyway, the day I finally went, she dropped hints a lot. Had a guy call me a couple of times, and you know, to me the war just wasn't bothering me. That wasn't it, you know. I just, good time Charlie. I had nothing to, I didn't have a drinking problem. Well, I did. A friend of mine got killed. I had been at his funeral, and about halfway through the wake, I was getting pretty sloshed with a bunch of friends of mine. We were sitting around talking about him. Oh, I suppose it was 7:30. I just said, I'm going to go. So I went down, found out one of the rules about being there was you're supposed to be there sober. So I felt a little apprehensive about staying. You know, they had me in there. They were going to keep me there. So after that, I started going back regularly and started talking about the real war through a couple of fellas I met there. Became real close friends with. They helped me. I talked about things that were bothering me, not only Vietnam, but life in general, my failures and successes and that sort of thing. Prior to that, I had been involved in other things, but my involvement seemed to be an excuse for drinking. They didn't drink, so it was a good place for me to go. It was a sober experience. But since that time, Vietnam has taken up a lot of my life. It's always been a positive thing. We built the Vietnam Memorial in Waterloo. That sure opened up the war for us. I mean, we talked to everybody. We contacted the families of all the dead that are listed on the monument. It was a cleansing experience, so to speak. There wasn't a story we didn't hear, a tear we didn't catch. It was bittersweet, but my God, it was to me, it was one of the most important things that I have ever done in my life.
I have a boy. I asked him if he wanted to go with me to the Vietnam Veterans Reunion. I said to him, this was the big one. And he said to me, but Dad, you lost. I said, we didn't lose. We just quit. Just think. Even little kids think that. We didn't lose. We just quit. I knew the minute they started pulling troops out of there, it was gone. It was over. If they just would have let us attack. You can't win a war without attacking. They would hardly let us go into Cambodia. If they just would have let us land in North Vietnam and taken away their resources, we could have won the thing.
No, I learned to relax in Vietnam, to take things as they came. It gave me some confidence that I didn't have before. I figured if I could go through that, I could go through anything. A belonging, a sense of belonging.
Why? Why do we still have POWs there? I don't understand why we can't make an all-out military effort to go back and militarily run through that country to get the POWs. They ought to come up with something. You know, if the Vietnamese are threatened with a military attack, they will come up with something so we can get those POWs out of there. I don't understand why we can't use our military force to say, give our POWs to us or we're coming to get them, period.
Well, the first couple times, I told them everything. I didn't leave anything out. I blew everything out. I didn't stop. I told them everything that was bothering me. And it's become my second family. I love it. You know, they're a tremendous group that helped me out a lot. And I wouldn't talk about it much with my wife. You know, she would ask me questions a few times and, well, I just tell the facts. And that was about it.
Well, I find I don't have to push anything anymore. I don't have to try to tell people things anymore. They usually come and ask, especially this new generation of kids. They are so interested. A lot of them have gone through fathers, uncles, older brothers, people who are having problems who they don't understand. And they want to understand. They're very curious.
These young men and women gave so much and got so little. Many gave their lives. They're due every respect. Before we get involved in another conflict such as that, we need a stated goal in mind. We went in there not really knowing, with no actual goal down the road. Before we commit American troops again, let's have it more identified. Let's get the country behind us. A war is a war. Lives were lost. The flower of American youth, especially in Vietnam, they gave so much. Let's give a little bit of it back.